The last thing my mother-in-law, Eleanor, said to me before the dinner party was, "Do try to keep the conversations away from, well, your work. It's a bit small scale for our guests." She patted my arm, a gesture that was supposed to look like affection, but felt like she was brushing off dust. I stood in the doorway of my own small apartment, the one she'd just insulted without even realizing it. The air was thick with the scent of the roast chicken I'd spent hours on, a recipe my own mother had taught me. It was my best dish. A piece of my history, my warmth, offered up on a platter. My husband, Mark, was standing just behind her, his face a carefully blank mask. He adjusted his tie, his eyes darting anywhere but at me. That silence was worse than any insult Eleanor could have crafted. It was a betrayal that echoed in the tiny space between us. Our guests that night were Mark's parents, Eleanor and Richard, and two of their oldest friends, a couple who dripped quiet wealth. They surveyed my living room like it was a peculiar exhibit at a museum. It was a space I loved, filled with books stacked high, mismatched but comfortable furniture I'd found and fixed up myself, and walls painted a warm, hopeful yellow. To them, it was a shoebox. "It's very cozy, Jessica," Richard said, his voice booming in the small room. It was the word people used when they meant cramped. He ran a hand over the back of my favorite armchair, the fabric a little worn at the edges. A flicker of a smile played on his lips. "I think it's charming," the friend's wife chirped, her eyes scanning the ceiling as if looking for leaks. "So much character." Character was the word they used for old and cheap. I just smiled, my hands gripping a dish towel so tightly my knuckles were white. I could feel my world shrinking down to the size of their judgment. My home, my sanctuary, was being dismantled piece by their polite, cruel words. Mark finally spoke, his voice too loud, too cheerful. "Honey, the food smells incredible. Let's all sit down." He gestured to our small dining table, one I'd lovingly sanded and restained myself. It could barely fit the five of us, our elbows bumping as we sat. I'd used my grandmother's china, the plates with the tiny blue flowers around the rim. I thought it would be a special touch. Eleanor picked up her fork and inspected it. "Are these vintage?" "They were my grandmother's," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Oh," she said, placing it down carefully. "How sentimental." The rest of the dinner was a blur of passive aggression. They talked about their recent trip to Europe, the renovations on their sprawling house, the successes of their friends' children who were all doctors or lawyers. Every topic was a carefully polished stone thrown into the quiet pond of my life, making ripples of inadequacy. I tried to join in, to ask questions, but my contributions felt like small, clumsy interruptions. They would smile, nod, and then seamlessly steer the conversation back to their world, a world of country clubs and inherited wealth, a world where I was a curious, temporary guest. The final blow came with dessert. I'd made a chocolate lava cake, a difficult recipe I'd practiced for weeks. As I brought it out, Richard clapped his hands together. "Bravo, Jessica. It's amazing what you can do in such a tiny kitchen. It's hardly bigger than our pantry, you know." Everyone laughed. A light, airy sound that didn't reach their eyes. Mark laughed with them. That was the sound that broke me. Not the insults, not the condescending smiles, but the sound of my husband joining the chorus that mocked the life we had built together. My life, my home. Later that night, after they'd all left, the apartment felt strangely large and empty. The smell of expensive perfume lingered in the air, a ghost of their disapproval. Mark was in the kitchen, humming as he loaded the dishwasher. He seemed oblivious. "Did you have a good time?" he asked, not looking at me. I stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching between us. I watched his back, the way his shoulders were relaxed, unburdened. "Mark," I said, and my voice was flat, hollowed out. "Did you hear what they were saying?" He finally turned, a dish in his hand. "Who? My parents." "They were just being themselves, Jess. You know how they are. They don't mean anything by it. They called our home a shoebox. They said my kitchen was the size of a pantry. They mocked my grandmother's china." Each word was a heavy stone I had to lift and place between us. He sighed, a long, weary sound. "Oh, come on, don't be so sensitive. It's just their way of joking. They love you." But they didn't. I saw it so clearly in that moment. They didn't love me. They tolerated me. I was an accessory to their son, an odd little project they couldn't quite figure out. And my husband, the man who was supposed to be my partner, my defender, he was their son first. He would always be their son first. I didn't fight. I didn't cry. I just turned and walked into our bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. The sound of the latch clicking into place felt final. It was the sound of a door closing not just on the night, but on a part of me that had tried so desperately to belong. That's when I realized I was completely and utterly alone. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, suffocating fog. I moved through my life, through my own apartment, feeling like a ghost. Every corner held a memory of the dinner party. The armchair where Richard had smirked. The small table where I had felt my world contract. The kitchen that was no bigger than a pantry. I told myself it didn't matter, but it did. It burrowed deep inside me, a cold knot of shame and anger. I'd look at the things I loved, a painting I'd bought at a street fair, a collection of sea glass in a jar on the windowsill, and see them through Aliner's eyes. Tacky, small, unimportant. Mark tried to act like nothing had happened. He'd kiss my cheek in the morning and talk about his day at work in the evening. He suggested we go out for dinner, see a movie, anything to fill the silence that had grown between us. But I couldn't pretend. The space he had allowed his parents to create between us was now a chasm. "Are you still upset about that dinner?" he asked one night, about a week later. We were in bed, the darkness a heavy blanket. "Aren't you?" I asked, my voice small. He was quiet for a moment. "They're my parents, Jessica. What do you want me to do? Yell at them? Cut them off? They helped us with the down payment for this place, you know." And there it was. The unspoken truth. We were indebted to them, not just financially, but emotionally. Their help was a leash, and they pulled it whenever they wanted to remind me of my place. I didn't realize how much I had internalized their judgment until I was at my part-time job at a local library. I was reshelving books in the art section, my hands tracing the spines of beautiful, oversized volumes on architecture and design. I'd always loved art. In college, I'd majored in art history, dreaming of working in a gallery or a museum. But life had other plans. Mark's career took precedence, we moved for his job, and my dreams got packed away in a box labeled someday. I took the library job because it was quiet and it was close to home. It was safe. It was small. As I ran my fingers over a book filled with pictures of grand, historic houses, I felt a familiar pang of longing. Not just for the houses themselves, but for the confidence and vision it took to create something so lasting, so beautiful. A memory surfaced, unbidden. Me, at 19, sitting in a lecture hall, listening to a professor talk about historical preservation. He spoke about how old buildings had souls, how restoring them was like listening to a story that had been waiting centuries to be told. I had been so captivated, so full of passion. Where did that girl go? I looked down at my hands, covered in paper dust. She was still here, buried under years of compromise and quiet apologies for taking up space. She had made herself smaller and smaller to fit into the box they had built for me. The phone rang that afternoon. It was Aliner. Her voice was bright and brittle. "Jessica, dear, we're having a little garden party on Sunday. Just a few close friends. We'd love for you and Mark to come." I paused, the book still in my hands. I could already picture it. The sprawling, manicured lawn of their house. The women in their linen dresses and oversized sunglasses. The polite, cutting questions about my little job and our cozy apartment. "I'm not sure we can make it," I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. I had never said no to them before. There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end. "Oh, is something wrong?" "No, Aliner. I just have some things I need to do this weekend." "Things? What sort of things?" The question was laced with suspicion, as if my time couldn't possibly be filled with anything of importance. "Just projects," I said vaguely, my eyes landing on the book in my lap. "Personal projects." Another pause. "Well, that's a shame. Richard will be so disappointed. I'll tell Mark you're not feeling up to it." She hung up before I could correct her. She had already rewritten the narrative. I wasn't busy, I was unwell. It was easier for her to process my absence as a weakness rather than a choice. When Mark came home that night, he was annoyed. My mom called. She said, "You're not coming on Sunday. Why didn't you just tell me?" "I am telling you," I said calmly. "I'm not going." "Why? Because you're still stewing over that dinner. Jess, you have to let it go. This is my family." "And I'm your family too," I said, and the words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. "Aren't I?" He didn't have an answer for that. He just shook his head and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the living room. The apartment didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. It felt like a cage I had helped to build. The warm yellow walls suddenly seemed sickly, jaundiced. The books I loved felt like a wall of unfulfilled dreams. I sank into my worn armchair, the one Richard had touched with such disdain, and I finally let myself cry. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but silent, hot tears that tracked down my face and soaked into the collar of my shirt. I cried for the girl who loved art history. I cried for the woman who just wanted her husband to stand by her side. I cried for the home I thought I had, which had been revealed as nothing more than a fragile stage set. The rain started to fall outside, drumming a sad rhythm against the window pane. It matched the rhythm of my own broken heart. I was so tired of feeling small. So tired of being excluded from a world I wasn't even sure I wanted to be a part of. But more than anything, I was tired of waiting for someone else to give me permission to be happy, to be proud of who I was. I cried until there were no tears left, until I was just a hollowed-out feeling in an empty room. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and the city lights began to blur through the water-streaked glass. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if my marriage would survive, or if I would ever feel at home in my own skin again. All I knew was that something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this, apologizing for my own existence with every breath I took. That's when I realized that no one was coming to rescue me. I had to rescue myself. That night, I made a promise to myself. It wasn't a loud declaration. It was a silent vow made in the dark, with the city humming its relentless tune outside my window. I promised myself that I would never again let someone else's opinion define my worth. I would build a life so full, so rich, and so completely my own, that their judgment would be nothing more than a distant, irrelevant noise. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. Mark was still asleep, a stranger beside me in the bed we shared. I slipped out and went into the living room, the first gray light of morning filtering through the blinds. I looked around the apartment, but this time I saw it differently. It wasn't a symbol of failure. It was my starting point. It was the foundation. I pulled out an old laptop and opened a browser. I started researching. Not architecture or grand houses, but small business grants. Online courses in digital marketing. E-commerce platforms. For hours, I fell down a rabbit hole of information, my mind firing on all cylinders for the first time in years. I had an idea, a tiny seed of a thought that had been planted long ago but never watered. My hobby of finding and restoring old, forgotten furniture. The joy I felt in taking something broken and discarded and making it beautiful again. It was more than just a pastime. It was a metaphor for what I needed to do for myself. What if I could turn that into something real? I started small. I cleared a corner of our tiny living room, laying down a drop cloth. That corner became my workshop. My first project was a small, beat-up wooden chest I found on the curb. It was covered in scratches and water stains, destined for the landfill. I spent every spare moment on it, sanding it down by hand, feeling the rough grain turn smooth under my fingertips, choosing the perfect shade of deep blue paint, replacing the rusted hardware with new, brushed brass knobs. It was slow, meticulous work. It required patience and focus. It was a form of meditation. Mark watched me with a kind of bemused detachment. "What's all this for?" he asked one evening, gesturing to my work in progress. "It's for me," I said simply, not looking up from my painting. He didn't understand, and I didn't have the energy to explain it to him. Our conversations had become purely functional. "Did you pay the electric bill? We're out of milk." The chasm between us was now a silent, accepted fact of our lives. When the chest was finished, it was beautiful. It was a unique, handcrafted piece that held a story. On a whim, I took some high-quality photos and posted it on an online marketplace. I priced it modestly, not expecting much. It sold in 2 days. The notification on my phone made my heart leap. It wasn't about the money, which was barely enough to cover the cost of my supplies. It was the validation. Someone else saw the value in what I had created. Someone else thought it was beautiful. That small victory was the spark I needed. I poured the money back into my new venture, buying more tools, more paint. I spent my weekends scouring flea markets and second-hand shops for hidden gems. My tiny apartment was soon filled with the smell of sawdust and varnish, a scent of creation and renewal. I built a simple website, calling my little business The Second Story. Each piece I finished, I would photograph and list, writing a short paragraph about its history and its transformation. People responded to it. They loved the idea of giving old things a new life. Orders started trickling in, then flowing, first locally, then from neighboring cities. I converted our small spare bedroom, which had been a glorified storage closet, into a proper workshop and shipping station. I learned about logistics, about customer service, about branding. I watched tutorials late into the night, my mind hungry for knowledge. I was working harder than I ever had in my life. I'd come home from my library shift and work on my business until 2 or 3 in the morning. I was perpetually tired, my hands were always sore and stained with paint, but I had never felt more alive. I was building something. Not just a business, but a new version of myself. Mark's parents seemed to notice the shift in me, though they couldn't place it. My refusals to attend their Sunday gatherings became more frequent, my excuses less apologetic. "Jessica is just so busy with her projects," Eleanor would say to Mark over the phone, her voice dripping with skepticism. I could hear her from across the room. One day, about a year into my venture, Mark came home looking pale. He was holding a letter. "My dad, he lost his job," he said, slumping onto the sofa. "His company downsized. They're letting all the senior partners go with a severance package." I sat down next to him, a strange feeling swirling in my gut. Richard had always been invincible in my mind, a titan of his industry. The idea of him being vulnerable was difficult to compute. "He's been having a hard time finding something new," Mark continued, his voice low. "His age, the market is different now. They've been living off their savings for months. He didn't want to tell anyone." The pieces started to click into place. The subtle decrease in their lavish spending, the canceled trip to Italy. Their pride was so immense, they would rather burn through their nest egg than admit they were struggling. My business, meanwhile, was growing exponentially. I had hired a part-time assistant to help with shipping. I was getting custom commission requests. A popular design blogger featured one of my pieces, and my website crashed from the traffic. I had to start a waiting list. The money I was making was real now. I opened a separate business account and watched the balance grow with a sense of disbelief and fierce pride. Every dollar was a testament to my hard work, my vision. I didn't spend it. I just saved it, letting it accumulate like a shield. The contrast between my quiet, upward trajectory and his parents' silent, downward spiral was stark. But I felt no pleasure in it, only a strange, sad sense of irony. Mark started talking about us needing to help them. "Maybe we could give them a loan," he suggested one night. "They'd never ask, but I know they need it." I looked at him. The man I had married, who had stood by and watched his parents belittle me, was now asking me to help rescue them. "We can talk about it," I said, my voice carefully neutral. But inside, a different plan was beginning to form. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about security. It was about proving to myself, once and for all, that I could stand on my own 2 feet. I started looking at properties. Not for me, but as a business investment. I wanted to buy a small commercial space, a proper studio where I could expand my operations. I met with a financial advisor, a real estate agent. I was learning a new language, the language of assets and equity and mortgages. I was becoming a woman my in-laws would never recognize. I was becoming a woman I was finally starting to recognize myself. One Saturday afternoon, I was driving through a quiet, leafy suburb, looking at a potential workshop space. I took a detour, a nostalgic impulse pulling me down a familiar road. It was the street where Mark's parents lived, and that's when I saw it. There, on the perfectly manicured lawn, in front of the grand, imposing house that had always made me feel so small, was a sign. A simple, red and white sign with 4 words that made my heart stop. "For sale by owner." They were selling their house, their fortress, their monument to their own success, and they were so ashamed they weren't even using an agent. I pulled my car over to the curb, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I just stared at the house, at the sign, at the whole impossible situation. The windows looked dark and empty, like vacant eyes. 1,000 emotions washed over me at once. Shock, pity, a cold, hard thrill that I was almost ashamed to admit. All those years of feeling like I wasn't good enough, of being mocked for my small life in my small apartment. And here was their big life, their big house, being quietly dismantled by their own pride and misfortune. I thought of Alina looking around my living room. It's very cozy. I thought of Richard laughing about my tiny kitchen. I thought of Mark standing by, saying nothing. The rain started to fall, just like it had on the night I'd made my promise. It streaked down the windshield, blurring the sign, blurring the house, but making my purpose crystal clear. I wasn't just going to build my own life. I was going to buy theirs. I realized this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. The next 2 weeks were a blur of calculated, secret action. I felt like I was living a double life. By day, I was Jessica, the quiet librarian, the wife. By night, and in every stolen moment in between, I was the architect of an audacious plan. First, I contacted a lawyer who specialized in private real estate transactions. I explained the situation, emphasizing the need for absolute discretion. I wanted to make an offer through a blind trust, a limited liability company with a nondescript name. My name was to appear nowhere until the final, irrevocable moment. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Davies, raised an eyebrow but asked no personal questions. Business was business. She helped me set up the LLC, Northwood Properties. It sounded solid, anonymous. Next, I met with my financial advisor. I laid out all my business statements, my savings, my assets. I had been so focused on saving every penny that I hadn't fully grasped the reality of what I had accumulated. "You're in a very strong position, Jessica," he said, looking over the numbers. A very strong position indeed. Hearing those words from a professional, seeing the proof in black and white, was like stepping out of a fog. The money was a tool, a key. It was the language my in-laws understood, and I was about to speak it fluently. I had enough for a significant down payment, more than enough to be taken seriously. The bank, seeing the consistent, explosive growth of the second story, pre-approved my mortgage without hesitation. All of this happened in whispers. Late-night phone calls in my workshop, clandestine meetings during my lunch break. Mark knew I was looking at commercial spaces for my business, so my preoccupation was easily explained. He had no idea of the scale of my ambition. He was too consumed with his parents' quiet decline. "They're so stressed," he'd tell me, his face etched with worry. "They're not sleeping. Dad just sits in his study all day, staring at the walls." I'd nod sympathetically, a knot of guilt and determination tightening in my stomach. The most difficult part was viewing the house. I couldn't go myself. Miss Davies arranged for a proxy, an inspector posing as a representative for Northwood Properties, to do a thorough walkthrough. He sent me a detailed report with hundreds of photos. I scrolled through them late one night in my apartment, the city lights twinkling below. It was surreal, seeing the inside of that house again, not as an intimidated guest, but as a potential buyer. There was the living room, with its cathedral ceilings and cold marble fireplace. The formal dining room where they'd dissected my life over a meal. The sprawling kitchen, gleaming and sterile, that was so much bigger than a pantry. The photos were clinical, but I could feel the ghosts of my own memories in every room. I could almost hear Alina's voice, see Richard's condescending smile, but the feeling was different now. The house no longer had power over me. It was just bricks and mortar. It was an asset. We made the offer. It was a fair market price, not a lowball. I didn't want to steal it. I wanted to buy it. I wanted the transaction to be clean, professional, undeniable. The waiting was agony. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leaped into my throat. Mark's parents, desperate and with no other offers on the table, accepted. They were relieved, Mark told me, that a quiet corporation was buying it. They were spared the humiliation of their neighbors, knowing the full extent of their financial ruin. They thought they were getting a discreet, painless exit. The closing date was set. Miss Davies handled everything. The paperwork was endless, a mountain of legal documents that I read and signed in her quiet, downtown office. My signature, clear and steady, on the line for the president of Northwood Properties, LLC. The night before the closing, Mark was talking about his parents again. "They're moving into a small condo across town," he said sadly. "It's nice, I guess, but you can tell it's killing them. Mom cried when she was packing up her garden statues." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for some shared grief. "It's the end of an era, you know? That house was everything to them. It's where I grew up. All our memories are there. I just listened, my heart a steady, heavy drum in my chest. He was mourning the loss of a symbol. He had no idea that symbol was about to be mine. The day of the closing, I told Mark I had a final meeting for the workshop space I was buying. It wasn't a complete lie. I sat in Miss Davies' conference room. The sellers were not present. They had pre-signed everything, eager to finalize the deal and receive the funds. It was just me, my lawyer, and the title agent. I signed the last document. The agent stamped it. He pushed a small, unassuming manila envelope across the polished table. "Congratulations, Miss Evans," he said with a professional smile. "You are now the owner of 124 Willow Creek Drive." Inside the envelope were the keys. 2 gold keys and a black remote for the garage. They felt impossibly heavy in my hand. The weight of the past, the present, and the future, all in my palm. I drove to the house. I didn't go to the front door. I parked down the street and just watched it for a long time. The for sale sign was gone. It was just a house again. Quiet. Waiting. That evening, Mark called his parents to see how they were settling into their new condo. I could hear his side of the conversation. "Yeah, Mom, I know it's hard. What lawyer? What are you talking about?" His voice changed, the color drained from his face. "No, that's not possible. There must be a mistake. Her name was on the final papers. Jessica Evans? No, you must have misunderstood." He hung up the phone and slowly turned to look at me. I was sitting in my worn armchair, the one from the beginning of this story, just waiting. I didn't say a word. His eyes were wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. "Jess," he whispered, his voice cracking, "what did you do?" I met his gaze, my own clear and calm. "I bought a house." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of our old life shattering completely. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open, seeing me for the very first time. Not as the quiet, accommodating wife, but as a woman he didn't know at all. Then the lawyer had read them the name on the final deed. It had been my name, plain and simple. The name of the woman they had mocked, excluded, and underestimated for years. The poetic justice was not in a loud confrontation. It was in that quiet, devastating moment of realization. It was in the fact that their rescue had come from the one person they never would have considered. Mark sank onto the sofa, running his hands through his hair. He looked utterly broken. "Why?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "Why would you do this, as a punishment, to humiliate them?" I finally stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city lights that had witnessed my transformation. "No," I said softly. "I did it for me. I did it because I was tired of being small. I did it to prove that I could. They just happened to be selling the house I wanted." It was the truest thing I had ever said. The revenge was just a byproduct of my own reclamation. He didn't know what to say. He couldn't defend them, not anymore. He couldn't be angry with me, not really. All the old dynamics, the old loyalties, had been scrambled. The foundation of his world had been turned upside down, and it was his own wife who held the deed. I held up the keys, letting them catch the light. "We have a lot to talk about, Mark," I said. "But first, I think I'm going to go see my new house." I left him there, sitting in the ruins of our old life in our small apartment. I closed the door behind me, the sound of the latch clicking into place. But this time, it wasn't the sound of a cage being locked. It was the sound of freedom. I didn't know if my marriage would survive that night. I didn't know if Mark could ever understand or forgive me for the secret I had kept, for the power I had claimed. All I knew was that I was driving towards a home that was finally, completely mine. That's when I realized respect can't be given. It has to be taken. The first time I walked through the front door of that house as its owner, I was alone. The movers weren't scheduled for another week. The rooms were vast, empty, and silent, echoing with every step I took on the hardwood floors. It smelled of fresh paint and lemon cleaner, the scent of a place wiped clean of its past. I walked through the formal living room, my hand trailing along the cold marble of the fireplace mantel. This was where Alina used to hold court, where I used to perch on the edge of a stiff sofa, feeling like an intruder. Now the silence was mine. The space was mine. I went into the kitchen. The enormous, professional-grade kitchen that Richard had boasted was bigger than my old one. I opened the stainless steel refrigerator. Empty. I ran my hand over the cool granite countertops. I turned on the faucet and watched the water run, the sound deafening in the quiet house. It was just a kitchen. A well-equipped, beautiful kitchen, but it held no magic, no inherent superiority. It was just a room waiting to be filled with life. My life. I wandered upstairs, through the master suite with its cavernous walk-in closet and a bathroom the size of my old living room. I found the room that used to be Mark's as a boy. It was painted a neutral beige now, all traces of his childhood erased. I thought of him, sitting back in our apartment, grappling with this new reality. Our future was a giant, terrifying question mark. Did he love the woman I was, or the woman I had pretended to be? Did he have the strength to build a new life with me, one where we were partners, equals, or was he forever tied to the son he used to be, in the house I now owned? I didn't have the answers, and for the first time I was okay with that. My peace was no longer dependent on his approval. I saved the best room for last. The study, Richard's sanctuary. It was lined with dark wood bookshelves, floor to ceiling. A large bay window looked out over the back garden. This was where he had run his empire and where he had hidden away during his failure. I walked over to the window. The garden was beautiful but slightly overgrown. Elinor's prized roses were wilting. It needed care. It needed attention. I stood there for what felt like hours, just breathing. I wasn't thinking about my in-laws. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about potential, about what this space could become. The study would make a perfect design studio. The living room would be filled with comfortable, restored furniture, pieces with soul and character. The walls would be painted warm, inviting colors. It would be a home, not a showroom. A week later, Mark came to the house. He found me in the garden, on my knees, wearing old jeans and gardening gloves, pulling weeds from around the rose bushes. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just watched me. I kept working, my hands in the dirt. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet, raw. I went to see them, my parents. I paused but didn't look at him. How are they? Angry. Humiliated. My mother, she said some terrible things about you. He took a breath. And I told her she was wrong. I told her that for years, she was the one who said you weren't good enough for this family, for this house. And now you own it. I told her that maybe she should have been kinder. My hands stilled. I slowly turned to look at him, my heart aching with a decade of unspoken hope. He had tears in his eyes. I'm so sorry, Jess. I'm so sorry I never said that before. I was a coward. I let them hurt you over and over because I was afraid of disappointing them. But the person I disappointed was you and me. He took a step closer. What you did, it was ruthless, he said, a small, sad smile on his face. But it was also brilliant. You became the person I should have been for you. You became your own protector. He knelt in the dirt beside me. I don't know if we can fix this. I don't know if you can ever forgive me, but I want to try. I don't want to live in this house because it was my parents'. I want to live here with you and build a new life, a real one. Our own. I looked at his face, at the genuine remorse in his eyes. The anger I had held onto for so long began to dissolve, not into forgiveness, not yet, but into something softer. Understanding. I didn't give him an answer right away. Words were easy. Actions were what mattered now. But for the first time in a very long time, I saw a glimmer of the man I had first fallen in love with. Months passed. We lived in the house together, but it was a careful, tentative dance. We were learning each other again. He started coming to flea markets with me on weekends. He learned how to use a sander. He helped me convert the grand, formal dining room into the main workshop for the second story. We filled that cold, imposing house with the sounds of creativity, with laughter, with the smell of sawdust and paint. We made it a home. One evening, I was in the kitchen making dinner. Mark came in and handed me a mug of tea. It was my favorite chipped teacup, the one Alina had subtly mocked years ago. I took it from him and smiled. I was no longer the woman who was hurt by such a small, petty comment. He was no longer the man who would stand by and allow it. We had both been broken down and restored, piece by piece. I stopped waiting for an apology from his parents. It never came, they never spoke to me again, and I found that I didn't need them to. My peace was not in their hands, it was in my own. It was in the feel of worn wood becoming smooth, in the scent of the roses blooming in my garden, in the quiet strength of knowing my own worth. Respect can't be bought, it can't be inherited. That's what I learned. It's built slowly and patiently with your own two hands. And the home you build inside yourself is the only one that can never be taken away. If this story moved you, please take a moment to subscribe. More true-to-life tales of courage, family, and quiet revenge await here. Thank you for listening.